Oh, it's connecting. Brilliant. There we go. Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody to our personal development session today on Wednesday, the 30th of March. And I'm Jenny Pelling. I'm the Director of Apprenticeship Development and Diversity at Kaplan. And part of my responsibility is the personal development of our apprentices and learners. And today I'm really thrilled to have a guest expert speaker join us on the subject of healthy relationships. And this is Helen Snape. Helen, we're really fortunate to have you with us, Helen, because you bring with you your psychology knowledge, your experience of working in HR and learning development, and years of coaching as well, both in relationships and experienced trauma. And you are a published author, a journalist. You've been on BBC interviews and World Economic Forum. So it's a real honour to have you speaking with us today. And everybody wants to hear from you on this really important subject. So I'm going to hand over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. Thank you for that lovely introduction as well. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this talk on how to have healthy relationships, where we are going to look at what are the signs of an unhealthy relationship and red flags. We're going to look at how you can confidently assert your rights in a relationship and also own your responsibilities. And then we're finally going to look at how to handle your own feelings and other people's feelings with grace. So we have an awful lot to cover, but before we dive in, we wanted to just do a quick poll with you that are here live on the call. And it's on a scale of 1 to 10. How confident do you feel about expressing your feelings and needs in a relationship? So hopefully you can all see that on the screen. It's an anonymous poll, by the way, and there are no right or wrong answers here. Like whatever you decide you feel. So 1 would be like, I don't have any confidence at all. Help. And a 10 would be, I'm super confident and I know my stuff. I know how to express my feelings and needs. So I can see a couple of you are putting your answers in the chat. If you can answer it on the poll as well, that would be really helpful. Okay. Okay, I think most people have answered. So it's just, yeah, simple, like between 1 to 10. If you're not sure, just kind of put your best guess. So there is quite a range there. There is quite a range. No 1s or 2s yet, no 10s. Yeah. Okay. All right, closing the poll shortly. If you haven't got your answer in, quick. Okay, right, I'll end the poll and just so you can see the results. That's what we have got so far. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we'll come back to that at the end. Marvelous. Okay, and I will start sharing my screen. I'm going to be sharing some slides throughout the course of the talk. Sometimes I won't have the slides showing, but obviously this recording will be available to you afterwards. So don't feel like you have to write lots of stuff down, but if you want to, that's absolutely fine as well. So yeah, where are we going to begin? Well, first of all, I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. I think Jenny's already actually done a fantastic job. But for those of you I haven't met before, yeah, I'm Helen. I'm a transformational coach. I've written for Happiful magazine on how to stop people pleasing in relationships. And I've talked at the Women's Economic Forum on how to handle difficult conversations with confidence. I've been working as a transformational coach and body-oriented coach for the last few years. But prior to that, as Jenny alluded, I worked for a long time in human resources and training. And you can imagine that I saw a lot of difficulties in relationships in the workplace. And one of the things that I did was qualified as a mediator in the workplace to bring together people that, oh gosh, sometimes weren't even talking to each other anymore. So I've always been fascinated about, what makes people tick, but also what makes relationships work and what makes them fall apart, and how do we handle conflict. And then, so that's in terms of like my professional life. In terms of my personal life, I've had my own struggles. I was in a very unhealthy marriage for a long time, and I'm not going to go into the details, but when I came out of it, one of the things that I was really determined to do was to not get into a similarly unhealthy relationship again. And so I wanted to learn everything that there was to learn about personal relationships and how to have healthy ones in that context too. So that's just a little bit about me. And we're going to start off with the kind of the darker side. So we're going to look at what behaviors can harm a relationship. And when we're looking at this, we're looking at all kinds of relationships. So this could apply to family relationships, or friendships, or with romantic partners, or in the workplace. So the first thing can be that we can have too high or too low expectations of other people. Do we really need to like the same brand of toothpaste as our partner? No, we don't. We can be too selfish in a relationship, or not selfish enough. How many people I speak to who say they don't want to come off needy when they're dating, and so when they're asked their opinion, they'll just say, oh well, whatever, it doesn't really matter to me, or it doesn't bother me. And the message that gives is that actually that they don't have any needs, and therefore you can end up attracting a relationship with somebody that thinks, oh good, you don't have any needs. You can have too little or too much tolerance in a relationship. Too much tolerance for a relationship in the workplace could look like you have a colleague who keeps interrupting you to gossip about somebody else in the workplace, and you don't like it, but you don't do anything about it. Or it also looks like not discussing feelings and problems. So for example, say one of your friends forgets your birthday, and you're actually you're angry with them and you're upset, but you don't say anything because you don't want to disturb the relationship. It can actually end up harming the relationship. Or you look for all your good feelings or excitement from this one relationship. That's a burden on a relationship that no relationship can really tolerate. Or we expect others or ourselves or the relationship to be absolutely perfect. And an example of expecting ourselves to be perfect in a relationship could look like actually saying yes to taking on a project at work which you can't properly complete because you've got too much on your plate, but you have this expectation of yourself that you should be able to do it and you should be perfect. And it ends up actually not being helpful. And then in terms of red flags in a relationship, so things that might be an indicator that, ooh, this is something to be wary of in a relationship. So one could be that they're never to blame. Maybe you have a sibling and they're like, oh, well, it's your fault that I shouted at dad because you were just annoying me so much. But it's really like they never ever take the blame, and it's about an inability to self-reflect and learn from actually their own mistakes. Or they don't make you feel good about your body. Like, you shouldn't feel pressured to look a certain way by anyone. Or they accuse you of cheating when you're just being friendly. And what this can do is like end up making you feel nervous and then kind of stop you from going out and say hanging out with your friends. And then you kind of begin to rely on that person more and more. Or they're suspicious and jealous of you, and that can show up in different ways too. You know, it could look like that they want to look at your social media, or they want to look at your phone. You know, you have a right to privacy. You have a right to be trusted in a relationship. Or, you know, they might be jealous of you spending time with your friends. Or they have frequent temper tantrums, or, you know, really big mood swings. And, you know, that may be from the outset of a relationship, or it could be that things are okay for a time and then something changes and suddenly you find that you're trying to tiptoe around them and trying to placate them so that they don't have a big emotional outburst. Some more red flags are you feel worse about yourself than when the relationship started. Or you feel insecure and you're often in the wrong. You know, when you believe like you can't get anything right, it can really end up eroding your self-confidence. Or you feel like you're on high alert and often walking on eggshells. So this is where you find yourself like tiptoeing around the other person so that you don't upset them, or you don't kind of set them off. And that's not okay. Or, you know, you've really lost sight of what you love and of who you are. And then the final one that I wanted to mention was that you recognize signs of gaslighting. And I wanted to go into this in a little bit more detail because I'm aware it's become quite a buzzword. You know, people throw around, oh, he's gaslighting me, she's gaslighting me. So gaslighting is a way of manipulating another person. And the phrase comes from a stage play, Gaslight, where the husband manipulates his wife. And one of the key ways he does that is he gradually turns down these old-fashioned gas lamps in the house. And when the wife asks him about this, he denies that it's happening. And so by doing that, he is making her question her own perception of reality. And so when somebody is gaslighting, it's quite deliberate and they know what they're doing. And I'm going to give you some examples of what it can look like, but I want to give you a big caveat around this too. You might recognize some of these examples and you might even think, oh gosh, I might say something like that. It doesn't mean that you're a gaslighter or that the other person is. As I say, what really makes it, you know, if somebody is a gaslighter, then they're really doing it intentionally. But it's just some things to look out for. So they might say something like, well, you're the one with the problem. Or what does you saying this say about you? And by saying those things, what they're doing is kind of diverting attention away from what you wanted to talk about onto something else, and probably actually making it about you. Or they might say, I have no idea what you're talking about, or you're making things up. And by doing that, they're denying what's actually been going on, or they're conveniently forgetting. Or they might say, you never remember things accurately. And by doing that, it's countering your own memory, challenging it. Or they might say, you're confusing me. And by doing that, they're really withholding, they're really not engaging with what you wanted to bring up. Or they might say something like, you're just too emotional, or you're too sensitive, or it's not a big deal. And by saying those things, it's really trivializing your feelings. It's minimizing your feelings. So those are just some examples. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen there. Okay. So I wanted to kind of get into, the signs to look for in an unhealthy relationship first, so that we can then move on to the good stuff, right? So I hope that's been helpful. What I wanted to come on to next was to talk about your rights and your responsibilities in having a healthy relationship. So the first thing is, in terms of your rights in a relationship, the first right that you have is a right to respect. So what this might look like is, say you're living, with some other people in the house. You might have different political views to them. You might have different religious views. And in a healthy relationship, that's okay. You can hold different views. You don't try to sway each other. You don't, belittle each other for having different views. And in fact, you might say, actually, I don't want to talk about those areas. And the other person respects that. Or similarly, you might, for example, say you're vegetarian, and when you go to visit your parents, they don't serve you meat with your meal because they respect your life choices. So that is the first thing, is respect. The second thing is safety in a relationship. And what that might look like is that actually in a healthy relationship, most of the time you feel just happy to be with the other person. You feel good in the relationship. That you look forward to seeing the other person. And when you're with them, you'll find, well, you smile a lot, you maybe laugh, you have connected conversations. You don't have knots in your stomach, and you don't avoid seeing them. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that you have a right to communicate your boundaries and to have them respected. And boundaries are simply about what is okay for you and what isn't okay for you. So an example might be saying to a friend, please don't tell any of my other friends about my parents getting divorced. And your friend accepts that, and they honor that, and they don't tell other people because they respect your boundary. There are lots of different kinds of boundaries, and we could spend a long time talking about them. But just to give you a few other examples of what they could be. So for example, time boundaries could be about when you start work, when you leave work, not taking work on holiday with you, or doing work when you're sick. Physical boundaries are about, about your personal space and who you let into it. It's also about who has access to your possessions, and whether you feel okay lending money or not. Then there are sexual boundaries. So, acting within your own preferences, your own limits, communicating that, and acting with consent and talking about contraception. Then there are intellectual boundaries. Are you able to hold on to your own opinion when somebody else disagrees with you? Is it okay for people to have a disagreement and you don't feel the need to go in and try and smooth everything over and keep the peace? And then there are emotional boundaries, which we're going to touch on more later on, but this is about you having the right to feel your feelings and letting other people feel theirs. And there's spiritual boundaries. So this is about you having the right to trust your own instinct and your own values and live your own spiritual life and not be forced to follow somebody else's way of doing things. So some examples of boundaries. And then another right you have is to have the right to have time apart from the other person. You know, I think if you spend all of your time with someone else, then you can end up like blobbing together. And there's no longer two different people to come together. You know, you need time away from each other to come together again and to have time with other people as well. And finally, you have the right to end a relationship. Now, you know, this could be because you recognize that maybe a relationship is unhealthy and you want to end it, or that you realize that actually there's some really fundamental things that you're incompatible around with this other person. Or maybe you just feel like you've outgrown a relationship and you have the right to end it. So those are some of your rights. Now, you also have responsibilities in a relationship. The first one is, again, back to boundaries. You have the responsibility to communicate your boundaries and to respect other people's boundaries. So if somebody hurts you, don't ignore it and speak up about it, because, you know, we can expect other people to be mind readers, but they really aren't. You know, they might not know that they have hurt you. So you need to speak up about it. And you need to say what you want and what you need. You know, like in a family context, you know, maybe say where people aren't getting on with each other, you might say, I don't want to be in the middle of family disputes. I will no longer be the mediator. And that could be your boundary. And it's also your responsibility to, as I say, to respect other people's boundaries by receiving their boundaries with openness. Sometimes I think we can react badly to other people's boundaries, but actually when somebody tells you what their boundary is, they are simply telling you how they want to be treated. And in a healthy relationship, we want to know that. So, boundaries. The second thing that we have a responsibility to do is to listen carefully. I always think there is a reason that we have been given one mouth and two ears. And, you know, sometimes we want to jump in, you know, we're listening, but we're listening to either come in like with an example from our own life that's similar, or so that we can give the other person the benefit of our advice. But most of the time, you know, people just want to be listened to and understood. So one thing that you can do if you're tempted to jump in with advice is to ask the other person what they want. You can ask them, did you want me to just to listen to you so that you can get things off of your chest? Or did you want some advice from me? Simple. And what we don't do is we don't belittle someone for sharing whatever they're sharing with us. So listening is important. The third thing that we have a responsibility to do is to take accountability for our own actions. what this means is, if you make a mistake, if you hurt someone, then you apologize. And if it's appropriate, you make amends. And then you commit to changing your behavior. And what an apology might sound like is, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize I'd hurt you. I won't do it again. You see, that is taking ownership of it, and it needs to be genuine, because people can tell if you're not being genuine, right? What an apology isn't, for example, is, oh, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. Or, oh, I'm sorry that you misunderstood me. Those aren't apologies because they don't take responsibility for the fact that you've hurt someone. And we apologize, whether we meant to harm someone or not. Like, we're apologizing because we've hurt them and because we care about them. And then the final thing that I wanted to mention in terms of our responsibilities in a relationship is honest communication. And in fact, make that honest emotional communication. And I often see this, with couples, right? Often reasons that couples end up breaking up or falling apart is a lack of honest emotional communication. Sure, they might talk about the practicalities of life, like, oh, well, whose responsibility is it to take out the rubbish or to do the washing up? But they don't talk about feelings and problems. They just sweep them under the carpet and like hope that it will suddenly like resolve itself. No. So it's our responsibility to express our feelings and our needs and to raise any concerns that we have. And it isn't about blaming the other person, and it's not about judging each other. It's about having an honest conversation. And if there is like a concern that you want to raise with another person, then I would recommend like not just like dropping it on them. Like, say when they're in the middle of doing something else, we want to set it up well. So what I mean by this is that you might say to them, I've got something really important to share with you. When would be a good time to have a conversation? So you're setting it up for success. And then you also want to make that whenever that time is, that it's going to be somewhere that's, you're not going to be disturbed. And as well as all of this, part of honest emotional communication is we don't make up stories about why the other person has been doing what they're doing. So, if your friends say, didn't text you back on the same day that you texted them, like, we don't make up a story about why that is. Oh, well, she doesn't like me anymore. No, we ask. We ask to find out why. So I wanted to come on to talking you through a really neat framework for asserting your rights in a relationship. So to do that, I will share my screen again and come back to the slides. So we've been through your rights: respect, safety, boundaries, time apart, and being able to end a relationship. We've looked at your responsibilities, so communicating your boundaries, respecting others' boundaries, listening, taking accountability, and honest emotional communication. Now, confidently asserting your rights. Now, to do this and to explain it, I think in a way that will help you remember it, we're going to go through an example. So let's take the example of my flatmate who has left dirty dishes in the sink for the last 7 nights. And I'm getting really annoyed about it. Like, because I then have to wash up before I can make my meal. And like, I feel like they're being selfish, and yeah, and like they just don't appreciate that we all have busy lives to lead. So in that circumstance, the way not to express myself would be to go up to them, like show them a dirty plate and say, huh, like, what's this then? Like, are you just not bothered? That doesn't really tell them anything. It's just going to wind them up, and it doesn't tell them actually what's bothering me or what I want at all. So what we can do instead is we can use non-violent communication, which really relies on us using I statements. And the way it works is first of all, we do the setup. So we've already talked about that, about setting yourself up for success in making time and space to have a conversation. And the second element to this is to observe. And in this phase, you are concentrating on what are the facts of the situation, rather than concentrating on how you're feeling or what you think the other person's intention was. You look at the facts of the situation. So what is it that you saw? What is it that you heard? So think about your 5 senses. And so, like in my example, the facts are, well, they didn't do the dishes for the last 7 nights. And that's it. Like, notice, I am not making up why they haven't done it. And I'm not making any generalizations. I'm not saying, oh, well, you never do the dishes, or you always leave dirty dishes in the sink. I'm just the facts. It's been the last 7 nights. And I'm not assuming like why they've done it. The second aspect that we then get into is thinking about, actually, how does this make me feel? And remember, there are no right or wrong answers with this. You don't need to justify how you feel. And when you go to communicate how you feel to the other person, you want to use an I statement. So, I feel this, rather than you make me feel. When we say you make me feel, it just makes the other person feel defensive. So we want to make it an I statement, and we want to avoid making it into a story. So for example, if I started saying something like, well, I feel like you don't respect me anymore, and you're being really selfish, and like, it really makes me worry about living together in the first place, then I've gone into a story, and actually it's going to confuse the other person. They're really not going to know what my point is. So we don't do that. So instead, I could just say something as simple as, when you haven't done the dishes, I've felt annoyed. I have felt uncared for and disrespected. Clear, simple. And then once you have established the facts and how you feel about it, you can then identify what your unmet need is. And that could be, for example, you have a need for connection, or for trust, or for respect, or for honesty. So once you identify your need, you can then express that need. So, in my example, it could be, I need to know that you care about doing your fair share of the housework in a timely way. And then finally, we make a request. So once you've communicated what you've noticed, how you feel, what you need. We can make a positive request of the other person. We want to make it a positive request that draws on their compassion and on their willingness to engage with us. We don't want to make them agree to something out of a sense of obligation or guilt. So in my case, a positive request could be something like, it would really help me if you can do your dishes the same evening that you eat off of them. And that's it. That's it. So this is a really neat framework for asserting yourself in your relationships. And then just having a think about, what also helps a relationship work, just briefly. It's being there when you need each other. When we care about someone, we want to be there when they need us. It's about asking instead of ordering. It's about believing in ourselves and the other person. It's about giving the relationship energy, attention, and time to help it grow. Because yes, in a healthy relationship, it shouldn't feel like hard work most of the time, but we still need to give them time and energy. It's about being flexible and being patient and being thoughtful and compassionate. And also, a sense of humor can really help. In fact, it's particularly helpful when you're perhaps having a disagreement. It can really break the tension. If you can just be a bit silly with each other, it can really help. Okay, so we have looked about how to confidently assert your rights in a relationship. And now we're going to come on to feelings, your own feelings and the other person's feelings. So first of all, starting off with your own feelings. The first point to make is you are entitled to feel all of your feelings. Sometimes people say to us things like, oh, don't cry, or don't be sad. And it's often because they feel uncomfortable with your sadness or with your big feelings. But know that you are entitled to feel however you feel. And all of our feelings are okay, right? There are no bad emotions. Sometimes, we can say to ourselves something like, oh, well, I shouldn't feel sad. Other people have things much worse than me, so I shouldn't feel like this. Just drop the shoulds. Stop shoulding on yourself, okay? We're human. We are going to have all of the feelings, and none are bad. And remember that you are not your emotions. Sometimes when we have really intense feelings, they can feel so overwhelming. When that happens, my invitation to you is to simply come back to your breath and take 3 deep breaths. And your feeling, if you feel a feeling, it doesn't stay with you for that long. Our feelings go through us within 90 seconds. That's assuming that we don't attach a story to them. So if you kind of feed the emotion with creating this big story about what's going on and why it's so awful, then it can kind of feed it. But if you just stick with actually, what am I noticing in my body right now? Then it will pass through. And if you're not really sure, like what you're feeling, then it is just literally asking yourself, how am I feeling right now? And dropping your attention below your chin and just noticing what's coming up for you. And know that your emotions are vital information. So don't ignore them And also don't make them boss. So what I mean by vital information is, like, for example, if you are feeling angry about something, that is probably telling you that somebody has perhaps crossed one of your boundaries, or they've really gone against one of your core values, what you think is important in the world. And that's really useful information. And also, anger has energy in it, right? So it is going to fuel what you then say and do. It will fuel what you need to say and do to take care of yourself. Similarly, like if you're feeling tired, that's information too. I would ignore how I was feeling really tired at work, and I would keep going and keep going until I got ill. And so don't do that. Like, however you're feeling, like it's vital information. And what we want to do is to learn to combine how we're feeling with our logical mind. So I often use the analogy of a car. So imagine that you're a car. Like, I know you're not a car, but just imagine. What we don't want is our emotions driving the car, because then we can end up doing things that we later regret, or saying things that we later regret. But neither do we want to lock them in the boot of the car and ignore them. We want them to be, a passenger in the car that we recognize, we feel our feelings, and then we decide, combining it with our reasoning, what we want to do. So that's a little bit about your own feelings. And then sharing your feelings. In terms of sharing your feelings, you want to do it when you're with people that you really trust, when you feel it's appropriate, and when you want to. Like, you don't feel like you have to share your feelings. And then handling other people's feelings. So other people are entitled to their feelings, just as you're entitled to yours. Now, I remember when I was a student and I shared a flat with several other people, one of my flatmates got really angry with me for storing some raw meat above her vegetables in the fridge. And she shouted at me, and except it wasn't me that had done that. And I'm not sure whether she ever believed me, but she had all these angry feelings. And I just had to accept she's got all these angry feelings. Like, she's entitled to her feelings. It's not my responsibility. But, other people, they get to feel however they feel. And remember, you are not responsible for others' feelings. Like, yes, you are responsible for what you say and how you behave. But, like, I used to think, for example, that I was responsible for making my husband happy. Big mistake. Like, I was never going to make him happy anyway. But it turns out, not my responsibility. And it's not your responsibility to make other people happy or to take care of their feelings. And as much as you can, don't take other feelings personally. A lot of the time, we don't know what's going on in somebody else's life, or why they feel the way they do, or what their personal history is that might impact on how they feel or respond to something in particular. And you can exercise boundaries if emotions are getting a bit too intense. That's either your own feelings or the other person's feelings. So say, for example, at work, you're maybe getting into a bit of a heated discussion. Then, you could say something like, oh, this conversation is getting a bit intense. I'm going to take a time out. I'm going to go for a walk for 20 minutes. And then when I come back, we can continue this conversation. Because if your feelings are getting too intense, you really can't think properly. And so you do need about 20 minutes time out to calm down. And in those 20 minutes, my recommendation is you just focus on making yourself feel good. So don't dwell on whatever the conversation was that you were having, like just find a way to really bring yourself into calm. You know, I really love like just going out into nature or even just looking at the sky. So that is a little bit about handling other people's feelings. It's not your responsibility. And really, like, to kind of conclude this, like, I really want you to know everyone deserves to have healthy relationships that are based on respect, safety, honesty, and kindness. I really believe that. And one of the things that has particularly helped me in learning to have healthier relationships has been to learn all about boundaries. And so I know that Jenny is going to be sharing with you my ebook, Building Healthy Boundaries, where it just goes into a little bit more detail about, you know, what good boundaries look like, poor boundaries, and what impact that can have on you. A little bit of my own story about my complete lack of boundaries and then learning how to actually have some, and the difference that that's made to my life, and then talking you through the steps that you can take to start identifying what boundaries you want in your life and how to start communicating them. And if you want to ask me anything, like in a private context, or you just want to connect with me, you can either connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm just Helen Snape, and my email address is helen@helensnape.com. And then here are also some websites and emails for further information and support. You know, if there's anything in particular that concerns you about your own relationships, or maybe somebody that you care about, these are different sources of information, and it includes the confidential support from Kaplan as well. So yeah, so you all deserve to have healthy relationships, and hopefully I've stuck within my time, and we have time for like 10 to 15 minutes of questions, if anybody has any.
Do. And whilst people are thinking of their question, would you like to run that second poll and see how we're, or did you want to do that at the end?
No, that's a good idea, so I don't forget.
And then people can have a chance to think of questions they want to raise.
Yeah.
And just you can either pop the questions in the Q&A or in the chat.
So yeah, so whilst you're thinking of your questions, if you can answer the second poll, it's the same question again. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident you feel about expressing your feelings and needs in a relationship? Okay. Well, I think about 80% of you have answered.
Good.
Let's wait for a few more. Remember, like 1 is like I have no confidence whatsoever, and 10 is I'm super confident. Okay, I think most people have now answered. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay, and then I can share the results. Can you see that all right?
Yeah, I can. Can everyone else? So we've shifted, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. That's really awesome.
It's awesome.
Oh, wonderful.
Well, I've certainly learnt a lot from you, Helen, there, and some really practical tips of how to handle conversations and boundaries in particular. So I know if I were going to fill in the survey at Kaplan, we ask people to complete a survey after a session. So I'm just going to put that in the chat so everybody's got it to hand. So if you could, everyone on the call, please could you do that, and then we'll know what you found helpful and what you might want
Mm.
from further sessions. That would be great.
Mm.
And just whilst that's happening, just one question in around not being responsible for other people's feelings, and wanting to know a bit more about that in relation to people you care for.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, yeah. It's a really tough one, isn't it? Because when you care about someone, of course you care about how they feel. um, but I suppose it's knowing that yeah, that actually whatever is going on inside of them is their responsibility. Like, as I said, I do think that happiness is an inside job. So, it's my responsibility to make myself happy. And no matter like how hard I try and how hard I might want other important people in my life to be happy, like it doesn't work if I just try and do that. Like, believe me, I tried for many, 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 many years. I tried really, really hard. But sometimes maybe we have to go through that to learn it, right? Like, I had to keep trying and until I kind of hit my rock bottom and realized it really isn't my job. um you know and I think people don't want to be fixed. What we really want is for other people to listen to us and for us to feel like we're really understood.
Yeah.
Mm.
Somebody's commented that it was in the Q&A is that it was a really, really good to have clear and simple steps to follow. And actually that comment resonates with me because you're direct
Mm.
in what you're saying. And there isn't a lot of flannel around it. You're really clear and to the point. And I think sometimes perhaps in unhealthy relationships that's not necessarily the case. Almost you try and hide the message, or you attempt to water down what you're trying
Mm.
to say with all sorts of other kind of ifs, buts, perhaps is, or shoulds, as you were saying.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And it's something I think that it's amazing because we can learn to be more direct. Now, I would say that my default, or my kind of old way of doing things was to be much more indirect and to kind of go around the houses, and it felt to me like it was a bit too kind of in your face to be direct. And I've kind of had to kind of unlearn that. And I realized that actually being more direct is really helpful. Like, other people then understand what it is that you want and what you need, rather, as you say, rather than kind of just kind of going around the houses and hoping that somebody's going to guess what you mean. Mm.
Yeah. And what's your advice to somebody who isn't in that position yet of being as direct and clear as you are, that might lack the confidence at this stage to do that?
Mm. I think it's to experiment, right? Because rather than kind of making it this kind of like scary thing, like it's how can I make this like an experiment or make it playful? Like, who maybe could I practice this with? Like, say a good friend, or a partner or something, that you just want to try being a bit more direct with, and somebody that that you trust, that you have a healthy relationship with, and where it's almost like kind of like a safe playground to try these things out with, and it's not going to have any consequences for you. And so when you get to kind of just try it out, and then you realize that the world doesn't end, and that perhaps, you know, the anxiety around being more direct, like actually you can live through that as well, and that actually how the other person responds, you know, it works, then that will just give you a bit more confidence to try it in another scenario, which might just be on the edge of your comfort zone or a little bit outside it. You know, I wouldn't start off with, you know, trying to be more direct with the scariest person in your life. Like, start off with something easy. Like, or even if practicing like with a friend is too much, you know, start off just by practicing on your own. Like, talk to a mirror or record yourself and start practicing.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And the final thing I'd like to ask is actually for everyone to put in the chat column message something that you learnt from this session or that particularly resonated with you. So what did you learn or what resonated with you? And let's just see where things land, because I've got a few. So let's see what people say. High expectations of others. Yeah. So for people watching this back, listening back, okay to have time apart. The thing that stood out is when Helen mentioned you're not responsible for other people's happiness. Yeah. Let's see a few more.
It's amazing to me because we, you know, we learn about relationships from, you know, what we saw growing up, from friends and like from romantic films, and they're not always the best sources of information. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just one last one. Let's see. How to take hurt or anger from a difficult conversation. That's a good comment. Thank you for sharing that one. One last one just come in. Responsibility and listening. Indeed, I do like your comment that we have one mouth and two ears, and both my ears were paying rapt attention to what you were saying, Helen. Thank you so much for today. You've given us a lot to think about, and we will be sharing with everybody the recording of Helen's session and her book that she mentioned, and that will be sent out. It'll be either tomorrow or on Friday by our team. So do listen back and read. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on Wednesday. And we will close the session now. Thanks all. Bye-bye. You're welcome. Actually, somebody just said feelings only last 90 seconds. Yeah, that was an interesting comment, Helen, you made there.
Should I stop the recording there?
Yes, please. Thank you.